Mark Cutifani led Anglo American for nearly a decade and has served on the boards of many companies, including Vale Base Metals. When we last spoke in March last year, he told me commodity traders and miners were struggling to read the Trump administration's approach to tariffs. Mark, welcome to the studio. So, where do things stand now?
The world, and this is a statement of the obvious, is clearly becoming more and more complex. In fact, if you look at Trump and you look at tariffs, really upending the idea of free trade, although I think the world's trade is a lot more resilient than people probably appreciate. But at the same time, he's had to manage China in a different way, because China's response to the tariffs wasn't as cooperative as I guess the US was hoping. Europe's taken a position, so things are changing, but at the same time, gold is doing pretty well, which probably reflects some of those geopolitical complexities, as well as crypto and the use of a whole range of other financial instruments. So it's been an interesting 12 or 15 months since we last spoke. But I actually, when you talk about complexity, the complexity's always been there. It just changes. So your ability to adjust to that new complexity, I think, is the key, albeit I don't think it's any more complex. It's just different, and it keeps changing, so it's dynamic. That's the issue.
And you've also had a big year. You stepped back from Raleigh, you joined Woodside's board, and you're chairing a new Tailings Institute and Odin. So how has your focus changed?
So I've backed out of some of the old company board roles, and I've sort of said to myself that from a traditional perspective, I'd only take on one board role. And I chose Woodside, one, the Australian connection, and two, energy remains an abiding interest, and I was in Total for 9 years. So one board role, Woodside's been interesting, and it keeps me in the energy sector in a quite a unique place in terms of LPG and gas, and they're moving or trying to move into the US with their Louisiana development. Odin, we've been providing Omar with ideas and thoughts, but not participating directly in key development. So it hasn't been commercial. It's been supporting him in a development of a different type of merchant bank, and he's done a wonderful job. Tony and I have provided him with access to people and given him context, but again, we've not been involved commercially. I expect in the next few months that's going to change, because what we said when we started is we'll see how it goes. We both liked Omar, thought he's very smart, and his intelligence of the marketplace has been valuable to us in terms of things we've done individually, whether it's the Vale work or asset reviews. Tony's doing asset review for Newmont as we speak. But I expect that we will formalise something towards the end of this year on the basis that we've got a lot of incoming stuff. So that's going to become more important in my life. The Tailings Institute role, the Global Management Tailings Institute, we're about to launch a conversation around signatories for the industry. So the team has done a fantastic job. And many of the board members have been doing this on defining the technical approach and how we engage with stakeholders. So in the next few weeks, you're going to see some of the results of that really good work. And that's been a bit complex because we've had to do with all the ICMM members, so the industry members. We've also had to work with the United Nations, UNEP, with Elisa and the team. And we've also had to deal with PRI, the Ethical Investor Group, with Adam Matthews. So bringing those groups together has been fascinating, and we've still got a way to go, but I think we'll start to have a significant impact in the dialogue. Unfortunately, we've just had another failure in South Africa, as you would know, So that was disappointing. But again, these things won't change. And in fact, the last 10 years, tailings dam failures have been going up. So as an industry, we need to take some significant action and support the smaller players in the process as well. So I think the role we'll play will become quite significant over the next 2 or 3 years. So that's been really interesting. And then a whole raft of other things that I've been involved in. I'm advising ERM on sustainability. We'll probably do a piece of work with them on nature and mining and how you can marry the two. So quite an eclectic group of things I've been involved in. And most recently, in the last week, it was announced that I was working with Elliot on some conversations with the Northern Star, the gold company, which has been quite interesting actually, and quite constructive. I don't think they've come to a resolution yet, but at least there's a conversation going on.
Well, for people who might not be finding mining as closely as you, or the miners who are watching you, you've thrown a couple of names around. You talked about Tony, you're talking about Omar at Odin. Can you tell us a little bit more what Odin's structure looks like?
So Odin again is a merchant bank run by Omar Davis. We were founding partners with Omar on the basis that if he was doing work and needed a connection on the mining side, we could provide him with a connection, and we could provide him or help him source the technical skills required to solve a problem. Now, again, in our case, we hadn't invested commercially, nor had we drawn money, because we did it on the basis that Omar and the team were setting up a new company. Tony and I had done well out of the industry over many years, and so from our point of view, we took a long-term view and weren't worried about putting anything in, but we were keen to see him be successful, because in the future, we thought that with an established merchant bank, if there are opportunities with groups, whether it's a transformation, whether it's a new project, those opportunities would be very interesting. But whether that was the right vehicle or not had to be tested. And to be fair to Omar, he's done a fantastic job over the last 3 years. And again, I've not drawn a cent, nor have I put anything in. So it's been a really interesting piece. But there's lots of opportunities that are emerging, and Omar and the team have done a great job. So we may well formalise those relationships over the next 6 to 12 months on the basis of some of the things that are starting to come through. So for us, it was about supporting a friend that had started a business, a guy that we thought a lot of. He needs a few contacts. We've been able to help him with those contacts, and converting that into something that I think is quite different in the marketplace is something that we could very well come up with in the second 6 months of this year.
Yeah, can we go a little bit into tailings? You said South Africa was disappointing. Why is that?
Well, I wouldn't say the country's disappointing. I've never said that about South Africa. In fact, I think it's an exciting place to be. Sometimes challenging and difficult, but always interesting. We had a recent tailings dam spill with Samancor Chrome, I think run by a Chinese company. I won't name the company, to be fair, but they've already said, look, we'll clean up whatever's happened. But for the industry, it's about understanding what were the issues, how did it come about, what can we learn, and how do we go forward. And I noticed that Gwedi Mantashe, the head of Minerals and Energy in South Africa, was there. That was good to see him being concerned and looking at how the industry can do a better job more generally. So a big issue, but we've had too many spills over the last few years, and the frequency rate's been increasing. So the ability to get a set of standards out there, set up the audit protocols and procedures, support the governance processes that are in place, and ultimately have the industry helping each other in these things is a really important initiative. And I think with Gwedi, we've got someone who'd be interested in being a partner in that type of work. So we'll approach Gwedi and see if we can support the team in terms of what they learn.
Can I return a little bit to the geopolitical risk environment and specifically how Africa negotiates this? So, one thing African countries are trying to do at the moment, they are pushing beneficiation right now. There are a couple of countries, Namibia, Botswana, Ghana, Nigeria, I think the DRC is another one, who are banning export of unprocessed minerals. Do you think that's feasible for them to beneficiate at home?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, it doesn't make economic sense for the local population. So understanding what works is really important. It's not a blanket yes or no. So the guidance, and I made this point a few years back at Indaba, if you're looking at bulks, say iron ore, coal, or if you're looking at metals, the case for downstream processing is different. In the bulks, particularly iron ore and coal, if you've got a high quality product and it's going into steel making, the establishment of a steel industry in an African country that probably doesn't have the energy resources available and doesn't yet have the skills, it makes more sense to build an infrastructure base around your mining base, probably going to a concentrate, supporting agriculture and those other industries which are big employers of people, and building that economic base, building energy infrastructure that can be competitive, access to water, and a skills base that can then support competitive downstream processing, and then look at investments when you've got those capacities in place. The problem with trying to go downstream without water, low-cost energy, and the skills base is you put a lot of capital into a facility that just can't make money. So you destroy value. And we've seen a lot of facilities in Africa, downstream facilities, closing, whereas it would have been better to invest in a broader economic base in mining, which brings roads, rail, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, communications infrastructure, health infrastructure, education infrastructure, and a lot of that infrastructure is applicable to the agricultural sector and a whole range of other sectors, and you build that economic base and that competitive positioning to then invest downstream. So it's a progressive, sensible approach, putting investments into the right places to benefit the broader community is the position that I've argued. But at the same time, I've also gone downstream with those that might be buying those minerals and saying, if you think long term and you're helping and you've got a partnership with an African country, then what's the benefit of you beneficiating their materials? What benefits do you give that country? So you can also support African countries negotiating better beneficiation deals. And that was the point that we floated in Riyadh in Saudi in terms of benefiting Africa to help them build that infrastructure base so they can be competitive over time. And so I think a long-term strategy that takes those points into account is a much better way for many African countries to operate. And it varies if you look at, and I'm going to use a pretty difficult example, but if you look at the diamond industry, one of the fundamental pillars of the success of the global diamond industry was De Beers and Botswana. Yet in recent years, we've seen threats from lab-grown diamonds. And I remember in the De Beers strategy, the idea of going in and being competitive in lab-grown diamonds and making a margin so that the pricing structure was reduced, which reflected the nature of the product, which is really, I'm going to say this and I'm going to be unfair, but I remember cubic zirconians and other diamond lookalikes that just weren't really worth much at all, and lab-grown's very low cost. But the key then to that strategy was investing in the marketing of diamonds. And unfortunately, at the same time that was launched, in 2023, Botswana and De Beers did a deal where they split the marketing of the diamonds, which did two things. One, it reduced De Beers' capacity to fund marketing programs on a broader basis, but it also created another competitor for their products. So again, and for them, it's turned out to be really difficult. And when you look at the Ukraine war, Alrosa not being able to contribute to global marketing of diamonds, put all those pieces together, it's been a disaster for De Beers and the diamond mining industry. And it's not simply about late grade. It's a much broader story. And this is where mining companies and countries, African countries, need to come together and work as partners, not against each other, because the De Beers case, in my view, is an example. If you don't keep that relationship strong and work together, you can very quickly undermine value and destroy value both ways, for the country and the company. And I'm not casting aspersions either way, other than to say, for the diamond industry to be successful with Angola and Botswana and Namibia and South Africa, they have to partner with the industry and think about how they market their products very differently. Hence, I've been involved in ETF opportunities that might help market and change the whole marketing strategy for diamonds on a global basis. But it has to be a collaborative effort of all the players to present your industry to the world. And I think that's been lost to some degree.
So it's a shared value model.
It is, and it's really important to understand it is a shared value model, and there are things, and I'm going to put a sort of a finer point on it. There are certain things the company does and can do in that equity market and in the marketing of the products versus the skills base that a country brings into that process. And in my view, I think that split on how and where diamonds went didn't help the diamond industry, nor did it help De Beers, nor did it help Botswana. So again, it's a much more complex issue, and there are all sorts of competitive tensions. But exactly when you need to come together and be at one, they went in two different directions. And I think that's the moral to the story is you've got to work together as partners and work on the strengths of each to present a model that works for the world.
One other field where Africa has a problem, they're being pulled into two different directions, the West versus China, and and the Middle East is also coming in. So what advice would you give to Africa? How do they negotiate these geopolitical tensions?
So the other point I would make in defense of Africa is, if you look at colonial history, it's been damaging and destructive. That we know. And dealing with those legacy issues is the responsibility of the companies that do work and the governments, and working out how to deal with those legacies in a constructive way is really important. So that's a starting point. And I think that's really important, that both sides acknowledge that those issues have to be dealt with constructively, but you have to create a competitive business, and it has to be about local communities and uplifting local communities. And in South Africa, there are good examples where companies have worked with local communities and done lots of good things. And there are other examples where it's been a bit fractured, the economics haven't worked, the company's not been successful, and then you don't have that economic base to support. And again, I think the strategy, it's not simply about downstream beneficiation, it's about communities, it's about partnerships, and it's about government partnerships in supporting those developing industries. So I think for Africa, thinking about those issues, dealing with the legacies, but at the same time making sure the environment is constructive for companies to invest, absolutely keen. We're seeing debates across the continent where people are saying, okay, well, we're going to take all over all the local team's got to take over all the mining, and you only get you buy 20 years in an asset, and after that we're all going to take over. And if you're in the mining industry, you won't invest, because when we invest in a company, we're hoping we get 50 to 100 years. Therefore, we'll put a lot of capital up front. You put your long-term development in place. If you've got to turn your assets over in that sort of time frame, you're going to go elsewhere. And in today's world, there are becoming more and more opportunities, even back in developing countries, to develop resources. So Africa has to start competing with the developing world again, because the understanding of the importance of critical minerals is changing the game again. And so you've got to make it attractive for companies to come in, but at the same time, companies do need to understand how to partner and support those local communities, those countries, and it has to be a contribution that goes both ways. And in my work with ERM, one of the things that we'll be focusing on, and we'll be doing a video series on the role of the mining industry, both in terms of protecting nature, because most people don't understand that mining industry is, if not one of the most important, or if not the most important, one of the most important industries in reducing our human footprint in terms of impacting the environment. That's one point. The second point, we have to be part of an economic resurgence in those local communities where we operate, and local communities have to see the benefits of mining developments. And so we're going to try and connect those dots. We're using Quellaveco, the Anglo development in Peru, as a great example, and the government talks about the Quellaveco model. But again, it can be done through Africa, and there are good examples through Africa where these things are being done, but it has to be done as a partnership.
There's an issue that I would like to ask you, if you'd like to comment, is illegal mining in South Africa. It wasn't such a problem when you were heading Anglo, but it is a growing problem now. So, I've actually just spoken to Sean McCormick of Trinity Metals this morning, and he told me about a program they have where they actually integrate, these artisanal or legal miners into their mining workforce. Do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, I do. In De Beers, a few years back, and I'm not sure where it is today, because I've been gone for more than 4 years now. We had the Gem, I think it was Gem Fair, Ferial, with Bruce Cleaver, ran this program where they established a set of operating standards for artisanal miners, and I'm trying to think what country it was. I think it might have been Cote d'Ivoire, but where we were developing safety, health, environmental standards to be followed by the small, and I'll call them small scale miners, and I don't want to call them illegal miners or artisanal, because there were different characters in there. So it was the smaller scale guys in particular, and by guys I mean men and women, so that you were protecting young people, you were doing things the right way, you were protecting the environment, and we provided a route to market for the diamonds through De Beers that reflected value back to those local communities. Gem Fair was the program, and that was a really good case study in how to build that and recognise that I think we've got about 2 million small-scale, we might call them artisanals, but the small-scale miners across the globe. And so addressing their issues either in bringing them into an organisation if you're doing large-scale mining, or supporting their activities and providing them a route to market where they get a fair price, and they're not being, I can use the word screwed by a whole range of mid value chain players that are skinning them for the value, was, I thought, a really productive and constructive program. Helped the government manage it in a way that looks after people and nature, but at the same time gives a fair return for the work they've been doing.
You've mentioned nature a couple of times in this interview, so I'd like to explore that a little bit more, because sometimes protecting nature and mining seems like two different poles. So, what is your view? How can we improve nature through mining?
So I introduced myself to a baroness in the UK when I was on the anti-slavery advisory committee to the government, and she was going around the room. She was the chair of the anti-slavery committee, and we had a human rights lawyer, very impressive, people talking about the wonderful contributions they were doing to society. So I thought, gee, Mark Cutifani, miner, she's just going to think about digging holes. So I said, that's Mark Cutifani. I work for an industry that has the most significantly environmentally net positive footprint on the face of the planet. I said, can you guess what industry I work in? And she said, I have no idea. And I said, it's the mining industry. Then she really sort of almost choked. And she said, that's the last industry I would have thought of. And I said, I'll give you two statistics. Agriculture, use of fertilizers. Without the use of fertilizers, we could only feed half the planet. Point one. Now, because we do use fertilizers, we take up about 40% of the Earth's surface for agriculture. We would need at least 50 to 60% of the Earth's surface to feed everyone if we didn't have fertilizers. So I said, we've reduced our human footprint by somewhere between 10 and 20% due to the use of fertilizers and modern agricultural techniques, mechanization, and all of those materials come from the mining industry, steel and everything else. And I said, secondly, urban environments, the ability to build up. So if you look at your background, you've got on your video there, you can see these big tall skyscrapers. The one thing, the thing that really, the mining is really important is we help people build up so we can concentrate urban populations instead of the big spread. And you see it in many of the African cities. So the ability to go from 25% of the Earth's planet dedicated to urban environments and infrastructure, reduce it to 15% is that ability to build up and concentrate infrastructure corridors around pipelines and those sorts of things. So in those two industries or areas alone, we reduce our human footprint somewhere between 20 and 30% on the face of the planet. We take up 0.3% of the planet in active mining operations to achieve that outcome. No other industry, in my knowledge, is such a significant contributor to the protection of biodiversity and nature on the planet as the mining industry. That doesn't excuse bad behaviour or excuse non-responsible mining activities, but it puts the mining industry in context. Without mining, we don't have the materials to live. So we couldn't support 8.2 billion people. We probably couldn't support 4 billion people. We'd be talking about hundreds of thousands of people being supported, and that's about it without the products of the earth, which is what we do in mining.
Can I just give the counter argument, not to that specifically? Sometimes when it comes to tailings dams, is where there's environmental damage and to community. So how do you make sure that the industry makes sure that those kind of disasters, and you also sat on a committee where that was very prominent, I think when you were at Vale, how do we make sure that those accidents don't happen?
So that's the right question. And so when I talk about mining's contribution to society, I talk about the fact that we supply almost everything and make people's life possible. We reduce our impact on the planet materially, but we still have accidents. We still do things that if we do have an incident, it's not pretty at all. It's pretty ugly, and it can be devastating, as were the tailings dam spills in Brazil, but in other parts of the world. So there's no excuse. I'm not making excuses for those activities. We as an industry have to get better, and we have to eliminate those issues, and communities and society has a reasonable expectation we have to keep improving. And so I'm not using that as an excuse for bad behaviour or poor practices. We have to do both. And that's why, even after I've retired, taking on the chair role, and these are unpaid roles that I do, the Power of Nutrition, the Global Tailings Management Institute, and those types of things are part of my personal commitment to giving back to an industry that's been very good to me and my family.
Mark, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. Is there anything you would like to add?
Look, I think if I could make one point, as a mining industry, we don't do a very good job explaining what we do, promoting the positives, and dealing constructively with the negatives that we have to improve on. And so I think Roatish and the ICMM team have been working very hard to improve those perceptions, but we can't leave it to them. All of us as leaders across the industry have to play our part, talk about the issues, and most importantly, talk about the things we're not doing well and what we're doing to improve. And for me, these sort of conversations are a part of my leadership responsibility in terms of trying to at least help articulate the story and help people understand the important things we're doing and the things we need to do to improve our image as well.
Mark Cutifani, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. It's been a pleasure.